Welcome to the All Hail the Fail podcast, the podcast that celebrates messing up spectacularly, embarrassing yourself repeatedly, and failing forward. I'm your host, Waterstones, executive consultant, coach, author, and proud of every failure and rejection it took to get me there. Today's guest is Suzie Robinson. Suzie is a digital workplace consultant, skilled writer, a published author, an editor, and super active in the internal communications communities. She's worked with Intranets for 15 years, and her experience has grown out of the roots of internal communications. So, of course, she has a focus on employee experience and engagement, plus strong content. Suzie, hello, how are you?
Hello, I'm very good. Thank you very much for having me today. I'm looking forward to having a chat with my spectacular fails.
Awesome. Okay, so tell me, if your best friend was introducing you at a conference, what would they say?
Well, there probably would be swearing, mostly from the friend that I've got in my mind. So I probably wouldn't quote them verbatim with probably what they would say. But I would say they would probably say that I don't take any rubbish from people. I'm fairly strong-minded and strong-willed, and fairly strong overall. I think this friend that I have in mind does come to me for advice on occasion. But also there is a degree of silliness that I think only your true friends see, and I masquerade as a very sensible grown-up when actually there is interpretive dance in my history with my friend. So it's all those kind of things. But so she's also familiar with my writing, so may also say I have a little bit of a dark soul that I hide on a veneer of a public face. But when it comes to my writing, I've got a little bit of a darkness within me, which makes my writing quite fun, I think.
Right. I hope that darkness is all like a good darkness, right? Because like otherwise it's quite awkward. Your friend, because she is a dark soul.
Dark soul.
Never knows whose soul she will reap next.
Hopefully nothing quite like that, but you never know.
So what are you most proud of achieving in your professional life?
Well, I've got a bit of a twofer story overall, so I've chosen two things here that I wanted to mention. So first of all is actually the role that I have now. So becoming a consultant much earlier than I intended. So when you're thinking about your life stages and professional life stages and what you want to do, kind of ultimately I was like, a kind of consultant sounds good. I like the idea of helping people and being nosy as well, and being able to talk to people about what it is they're doing and work on lots of different projects. I was like, that sounds great. I'll do that at some point in my life. And then it actually happened about 3 years ago, which was far sooner. So I was very proud that actually I moved much faster through that than I was intending. But the other thing that I wanted to mention, which is a starting point probably to my tale today of failure, was actually a success right at the end of it. So I won an award right at the end of dealing with what I'm going to talk about today. And so actually that was an incredibly proud moment for me, given that I was having a good while of not a great time. So actually being rewarded at the end of it was actually incredibly rewarding, and a nice way to kind of put a full stop on the end of what had happened with all of that stuff.
That's some very good foreshadowing. Tell me about this time that you failed spectacularly, but luckily it led to an award. So. Caveat, I'm already skeptical that a spectacular failure ends with like award-winning failure is obviously going to be the title of this, by the way.
Oh, excellent, amazing! That sounds.
We're done already.
I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing though. But anyway, yes. So I say I've got a 2-for-1 story. So there were two things that happened at the same time, basically. So it amounted to a really horrible situation, basically, that I went through a good few years ago now. And there was a lot of bad stuff that was happening around me in my workplace, within the team that I was managing, with my bosses, within the company as a whole, also for me personally in my role. And one thing that I failed particularly spectacularly with was noticing how badly it was affecting me at work and also personally as well. So I ended up bringing some of it home, as you do. It impacted on my mental health quite badly. So I ended up being off sick for a little while, but off being off sick doesn't wave a magic wand, and helpfully the doctor I was speaking to told me that I should probably find a new job. I was like, that's great, thanks for that. That's really, yeah, I hadn't figured that out myself. So thank you for that comment. And so I was already looking for a new job by the time I was off sick. And the second thing I failed at was actually finding a new job. So this is a few years ago now, and I was forever, it felt like coming in second. I was always the bridesmaid, never the bride. I was always being told how amazingly well I was doing in my interviews, always got amazing feedback, and quite a lot of times I never really had anything specific that they could tell me as to why I didn't get the job. I just wasn't quite as good as the person that got it, which is incredibly frustrating. And it took me a good, I mean, I say it took me just under a year. In all likelihood, when I actually probably suddenly thought, I should probably find a new job, it was more like 18 months, I would say. And in the context of a situation that was just horrible, that felt like an eternity. So it took me a while to find a new job. At the same time, I wasn't very happy in the one that I was doing. So yeah, generally a bad situation.
How many jobs do you think you ended up as the bridesmaids for?
Oh, I would say in that time, dozens.
Wow.
I mean, there's probably not a big company at some point that had an internal comms manager role coming up that I didn't apply for. And so I see those brands and I kind of think back to the interviews I had, and remember them mostly with fondness. And actually the vast majority were actually quite good experiences. Interviews should be fun to both host and to be a part of, and so there should be an enjoyable experience. And actually, I was progressed through stages for quite a lot of them. And the experience I had in meeting people and talking with them, and some of the teams I potentially could have won were really friendly. And it was great talking with them. And it just got to those kind of final stages where I just seemed to fall, possibly when I was meeting more senior people, or just maybe there were also a couple of really frustrating times where I was basically offered the job and then something happened in those companies and so the jobs were withdrawn, which is just awful. So that's particularly bad. So yeah, it was a good few dozen, I think, over those 18 months where I got to that point.
That's quite terrifying to me because my first podcast guest, Eva Ileva, she talked about having like 80 plus rejections. I counted with, I feel your pain. I also had a year where I had 100 plus rejections. I had a friend who then listened to the story and he went, that's really nice. I've had 400 plus rejections before landing my current role. At which point I went, like, how do you even carry on at the point of 400 rejections? But the interesting thing is all of us were taking into account applying for roles and not hearing anything back, because that's actually most often the experience.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Kind of familiar with, right?
Yeah, and I'm not even counting those. There was a lot of, I mean, yeah, it's probably in the hundreds where I didn't hear anything back.
I mean, it's quite cool though that you got to the interviews. I wonder if it makes it better or worse when you look back at it, that you got to the point where they were so interested that they might have even offered you a role and then it fell apart. Like, would you rather be ghosted or would you rather be dumped, I guess is the question.
I think being dumped is better because at least it meant, for me personally anyway, I knew it wasn't me as an individual. It was to do with my experience. So the feedback that I often got was the lack of evidence compared to other people that I could bring. And that was because of my existing role, where there was no budget at all for anything that I was doing. The only budget I had was basically IT's budget, where they looked after the intranet technically. So our intranet was our communications tool. This is kind of, Yammer was around, but it hadn't been around for very long. There were a few other things, but not really a huge amount. I used email as well, of course, but it was all kind of handmade. There was no budget for a newsletter tool. I did physical things, so I did a few magazines, but there, again, I had no budget for a regular kind of thing. I occasionally twisted marketing's arm to help me with posters so that I could get things up around the areas that I was communicating with. So there were a few things I could do, but I was so restrained by my current role that it was hard for me to say, well, I can't, okay, you're saying I have this lack of evidence, but I have all these qualifications, I have all of these understandings, I know how to deal without a budget and still communicate really, really well. I have all of these interpersonal skills, I'm getting on with you really well. If you show me something, I will learn it really quickly, as evidenced by all of these things. But that's why I was always second to the person that could do those things, but had that evidence to say, and this is how I did it all, even though there's no guarantee that they, of course, actually did deliver those things. So that's why I was always that second position. So there was that bittersweet element of, it's like, well, I know it's not me, but it's my lack of being able to just present it to an interviewer, which I completely understood as well. As someone who interviewed a lot myself, I was like, I totally get it. I can completely understand why, but it's just so frustrating. So I was like, just give me a chance and you'll have someone who'll work really well for you, for your business and what you're trying to achieve. But just wasn't quite going in my way, unfortunately.
That point about evidence I find really fascinating, because I guess you never really think about, like, what is the evidence you're taking in to provide to show people that you can do a thing. It is something that I do talk to people about for promotions, though, because it's all about storytelling, I guess. Although, kudos to you. I really bought the story you told about being able to do it despite limitations. Yes. I was like, yeah, I buy that. Like, that sounds great. But we don't often think about the kind of evidence and the kind of stories that we need to be able to tell. Did you learn anything that you now apply about building that kind of evidence about your competency and your expertise?
Yeah, so I think that the spiel I just gave you was built up over that time of realizing what it was I was getting rejected for, those things that they were saying, you don't have evidence of this. It's like, well, okay, how can I get that evidence and show the next person this thing? And how can I talk about my situation in a way that shows the strengths I bring, even if the situation isn't as strong as someone else's situation? And I think that was something I learned, and that storytelling about myself, as you said, it's that knowing how to position things and using the STAR approach, so the strengths and the situation and all of that kind of stuff. I looked at all of those different techniques for interviews, and I made sure that I was using the ones that really seemed to land well. So I can read people quite well anyway, but actually taking that into an interview situation and really watching the interviewer and listening to their questions very closely and learning how to answer those questions right was a huge skill that I developed over that time, and actually I bring through now when I deal with our clients and when I talk to my colleagues, and in the past as well in previous roles, and actually being able to explain situations in the best way that I'm in that situation to present it, so it's right for whatever I'm doing, was actually something I learned. So it was a benefit of a slightly messy situation.
I actually was not familiar with the STAR technique before you just brought it up. So thanks to the power of the internet, STAR stands for situation, task, action, and results.
That's it.
Describe the situation, explain the task and what the goal was, provide details about the action you took to attain this, and then conclude with the results of your action. And I think that for some people is the most difficult part, because you can talk at length about the task and the goals, etc.
Mm.
The result, especially when you're in a support function, right, where you
Yeah.
can't say X amount of revenue created
Yeah,
or X many
definitely.
jobs done or X products sold, etc. How do you think about your own results and how you frame them?
I try to think again about the stories, the things that will make the best story. So I think being a communicator myself kind of helps in that sense. So being able to figure out those things that I think will make people go, ooh, or those things that will really make someone stand up and listen to what I'm saying is an interesting result. Because I think making yourself stand out, particularly in an interview situation, is what matters most. You can answer the questions from an interviewer absolutely perfectly, but if you don't stand out from other people, then you could be the best candidate in the world, but you're not necessarily going to stand out in those ways. So I try to think about the results that I thought would meet those needs. And that's something that I think about now as well. And throughout the interviewing process, and even now, I make notes of those things that I think are important or interesting, make good stories for use at some point. And actually, alongside that, I was also making notes about the bad situations I was in. So the role that I was in, and the fact that I wasn't having a good time, and there was lots of stuff happening around me that was questionable. I made sure I was documenting all of those things, because I had a mind on later down the line that if I needed to draw on any of this stuff, then I had it there, and I didn't have to wade back through and think about times and dates and who said what and what evidence I had, and copying and pasting at the time. And it was not fun, and it was really hitting home just how bad a situation I was in, but it was incredibly valuable to be able to do that. And again, that's something that I will do now. Not that this role is bad in any way, I don't have to do about my current job, thankfully, but if there's anything in a project maybe that is a little bit rough, then making those notes so you can go back and say, okay, this didn't go great, how can I make improvements off the back of it? And so those note taking, so that diarying really did help, and is something that I've brought across now to even positive things as well.
I mean, Danielle Leslie talks about in her course from scratch online course, she talks all about this idea of keeping a brag bio, which is kind of a biography of all the
Yeah.
awesome stuff you've done. It's not just like, you know, Suzie Robinson is a writer, whatever. It's like Suzie Robinson has published X number of articles and X number of sites over this many years with
Yeah.
this many readers. Da, da, da. And I thought that was a fascinating concept. But I am so pleased to have learned this concept of doing the opposite almost, because those questions that you get in situations about how did you deal with a difficult situation, how did you deal with
Yeah.
difficult shareholders or stakeholders or whatever it might be, that is the stuff where my brain goes a complete blank.
Yeah.
And it's never occurred to me that maybe there is a online spreadsheet somewhere where I could be keeping all of this information that I could pull up and read about. So I'm like, this is so good, writing that down.
Yeah. It's I say it's not always fun. So if it's a particularly bad situation, then writing it down and copying, pasting emails and other messages, and just doing that at the end of a week or something, it's just like I need to not be here anymore. But for then looking back at it and thinking, well, actually, I have been able to deal with this sort of situation, and when this cropped up, then I was able to manage it, and this is how I did that. And actually having that evidence recorded makes such a big difference. It's so much easier than when you need to draw on it to have it there already to hand. Well, particularly then thinking back over those bad situations, was really all you want to do once they're over and done with is bury it in the back of your mind and have a glass of wine so that it grounds it as well. And then you don't really have to think about it again. But actually making those notes is quite helpful.
And of course, top tip, because anyone can do a subject access request to a company and any information on their servers about them. Don't save that on your work-related anything. Please save it on your personal things. And please also use code names for individuals if you want to talk about individuals, because you're not using this for legal purposes. And you certainly do not want it to be used against you in legal purposes for the same reason. So very good advice. I'm interested in what was like the breakthrough moment where all of the things that you were trying to do to fix this, the collecting stories, collecting evidence, thinking through what you were going to tell, like when did it actually start to work?
I think it was a gradual thing. So over the months, as I got the feedback from individual interviews, and I was able to think, okay, what can I do to fix this? What can I try out at work? What can I actually implement in my day-to-day actual working life that's kind of for my end readers, but also for me? Because I know I need to move on, and I did have the freedom to be able to do what I felt was right. So I was like, actually, I'm going to try something new. And I was reaching out and networking, which helped me a lot. So actually getting a good range of people around me that I could get suggestions from, but also go on to learn more things from them, recommendations for websites and courses and that sort of thing. So it actually felt like maybe a gradual life raft being built underneath me. So it was a very slow process. But eventually I actually felt like I'm in the right place now mentally, and I've got the right range of experience that I now need to just have that luck hit, that I either find someone who thinks, you know what, I can see how well she's going to do, so let's just go for it. Or that a slightly different role would come along that was much more suited to my strengths, without me having to say, yes, I know there's not this evidence, but this is actually how I can do all of these things, but I'm showing you in a different way. And that's what happened ultimately, was that right job came along. And as soon as I saw it, I knew that I had to really be careful with it and do absolutely as much as I could to make sure I landed it. And so I prepped for everything, but my preparation for that particular interview and the subsequent interviews I had, I put a lot more effort into that than I did with any of the other ones. Listened to the feedback that came from the first round, applied it for the next round, and then that was kind of it, and it ended up working. And then also making sure, of course, that I actually had the offer in writing before I handed in my notice, having had that experience as well of roles being withdrawn.
Sign, not even get it. Sign the offer letter first before you submit your notice. Like that is like step number one. Truly.
Yeah, exactly. So I was like, there we go, locked in. Now it's done. Now I can hand in my notice. But in terms of managing in the role that I had, so that it took me a long time to realize how much it was impacting me. So once I knew I had to get out, basically, I had to find a new job, I realized that I needed to have it impact me as little as I physically could allow it to. So while I was there, obviously stuff was happening around me. The job didn't change. All of the situations didn't change. It was long and arduous and unpleasant. But I worked my hours. I didn't do overtime. I didn't deal with things unless they were particularly urgent. I wasn't completely cold. I'm reasonable. I knew that if there was anything urgent, anything that really needed addressing, if someone really needed help, I wasn't going to ignore that. I deal with that outside of hours, but otherwise I was like, nope, I start at this time, I leave dead on this time, I am out that door and going to get my train so that I can get home and have an evening where I'm doing very little. I'm spending time with my now husband, and then over weekends I was like, nope, I'm not going to do anything. I shouldn't have to, and there is nothing that is pressing that would need me to do these things. But when I was at work, I worked what I would normally do. So I was as committed and I cared as much about what I was doing. And I think that's something I probably have learned about myself, is that I do care very much about the work I do and the people I help, and that didn't diminish, which I'm pleased about. I still cared about those things. It was just the kind of situation that was circulating around me that was the difficult bit.
I coach a lot of people who are stuck in toxic workplaces and find themselves in the same situation that you were in, where they're kind of, I mean, killing time is a strong word to put it, but they have bills to pay. So they don't have the option of kind of leaving and
Yeah.
giving it some time to recover or feeling those things. And one of the things I talked to them about is exactly some of the strategies you've been talking about of emotionally disentangling yourself with your personal value being the value of your work. Um, Still, of course, being engaged and being a good employee and showing up, etc., but not going so far that you are now hurting yourself.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. Some of them do manage to do it. A lot of them don't. What was the difference for you? Because presumably you could have just started off like that and not landed up in such an emotionally difficult, frustrating situation if you had had those boundaries up front. So what was it that prevented you from doing that?
That's an interesting question. I think it's just the way that I am. So I am, probably should have mentioned it with what my friend would have said. I think I am a very passionate person, and I do care. Whatever it is, whether it be at work, whether it's private life, whatever the situation, I do care about people. And so I always want to do the best I can so that I can help people. And so for me, the idea of being at work and not delivering the amount I can based on how I am that day. So obviously you get ill. There are off days where you're tired, and sometimes where you don't have very much to do. So you can't throw yourself in 1,000,000,000%, because you'll get through it in 5 minutes. And so you have to pad a little bit. There are situations where it's just not practical. But for me, I will always deliver what I can. And in that role in particular, I was responsible for quite a large team of people. So I also couldn't be just kind of towing the line and just doing the bare minimum, because I believe that line managers should lead by example, and they should be as engaged or more engaged than you with the business, with their job, with your job. So I couldn't lower that level to an extent that would then impact them too badly. I think I did that well. So partly that may have impacted me more. So from a selfish perspective, I probably or possibly shouldn't have done that. But I didn't think that would be fair to them. So I kept that level slightly higher maybe than even I should have done in that situation for my own personal needs.
I wish everyone took being a line manager as seriously, because I sometimes think that we, as organizations, at least the ones I've seen, pay so much attention to like the most senior leaders in the organization, right? And what they're doing and what their behaviors are, and plow a lot of money into their learning and development, etc. But every single line manager has the ability to like fundamentally shift the experience of the person who's working for them. And the number of people who quit jobs because of a line manager versus a company or a job or a culture or a team, it's actually really kind of shocking to me.
It is. And it was, for a long time, one of the reasons why I stayed in my role, actually, because my line manager was very good. And then as the business kind of shifted, that relationship shifted a little bit as well, because there were other things going on that impacted that for me. And actually, I shielded my teams from all sorts of things and filtered things down to them, and was very careful about what I passed on to them, because it wasn't through me gatekeeping or wanting to keep things secret from them. It's like, but they don't need to know some of this bad stuff that's happening. And I would say that probably, apart from the fact I was off sick for a while, I doubt very much that any of them really knew what was going on. And so if any of them are listening now, then this might be a bit of a surprise. But there was all sorts of things that I was fighting for them and shielding them from, that they never saw and never probably could dream about, what I tried to do to try and protect them. And that also didn't help for me personally. But as a line manager, that's one of the things that you have to do. And it is a hard role. And as you say, I don't think it is something that people or businesses really do take into consideration that much. It's the people who are doing the jobs that makes the money, basically, and then the very, very senior people, and then everyone in between. There does need to be more alignment, I think, and better things that come off the back of it.
Yeah. More equality across all of those dimensions, doing the work and getting the money from the work and kind of being invested in the work at all levels is like the dream.
Yeah.
What did you learn from this 18 months of, to summarize, difficulty in the professional career and trying to move to the next step? And, of course, that's like the professional PC version, but like, what did you actually learn from it as well?
So I learned good interview technique. So by having to learn what was working and what wasn't working from all of the, and also application forms, and learning how to fill in application forms that are basically the same very quickly. Doing all of those really practical things was a minor thing, but was incredibly helpful at that point. And also understanding where my skills lie as well. So actually having to look at myself and figure out that storytelling that we talked about, and those things that I really needed to make sure I highlighted more than others, and how I could position certain things. Those were all the things I learned and that I talk about. I generally don't talk about that period with people. So this is probably the most I've talked about it, beyond being in the pub and talking to talking to friends. So it's not really something that I've shared many learnings from, because it was very hard. But there are a few things I've learned, like, for example, it's quite easy to go to interviews during working hours.
True, right?
Yeah. Which I was very paranoid about at first, and then I was like, well, actually, being honest, it was probably the business I was with at the time. It's probably their desire that I left anyway. So I doubt anyone would say anything, even if it was clocked. But I would book time off. I wasn't doing it all just completely on my own, but working from home to have home-based interviews online, just that's easy enough to do. But actually, when I was interviewing in physical locations, I would tie it in with going on other visits, or I would tie it in with other events I was going to, or just say I had an appointment, I was going to be late. So that was a surprise that I uncovered. So for anyone in a similar situation, I would say kind of chill, don't worry, just go for your interviews. And if the company questions it that you're working for, then it's a way for you to start those conversations and address it. But I also learned about not letting work get in the way of my health and personal life again. So that whole experience was just awful, and it's something that I vowed that I won't do again or allow to happen again. So that's something that I have carried on now. So I do try to work my hours. I will do overtime if I need to do stuff, and I'll book things up out of hours if it's pressing. But I will try and finish around on time, and I try not to do things over weekends. But I'm flexible, and obviously will flex up if it's needed. But not feeling that I have to do those things was a big part of finding the right roles for me after that original job. So once I moved on from other positions, actually working for a company that has that same ethos was quite important for me. And in terms of being in a quite a bad situation, I wish I had phoned ACAS earlier.
ACAS?
ACAS, so they are I think they're a government agency that helps with bad employment situations, basically.
Okay.
Yeah, so a bit like Citizens Advice, but it's specifically for work-related situations. And had I phoned them sooner, they would have given me some kind of early legal advice to get me into a position where if I'd wanted to do anything, I could have done. I chose not to. That's a very difficult bridge to walk across, I think, and is one of the reasons why I don't tend to talk about this situation, because of the way it could reflect on me, the previous company I worked for, and the situation that I was in. And obviously there are different sides to stories, so that's another reason why. But ACAS would have provided some guidance that was valuable. So for anyone who's hearing this and feeling that it's a familiar situation, I would advise that for definite. But overall, the good thing was I did learn that I was pretty resilient and fairly strong with what was going on, and I learned that I knew what I wanted to do ultimately, which is to become a consultant and keep working with internal comms things and helping people, and it helped me point me in that direction of actually don't just drift through a career, don't just go bounce into different jobs because one comes up. Actually think about what you want to do and make a determined decision, rather than just taking something because it's there.
I think that this conversation has been a really good example about how you don't have to be unprofessional to talk about difficult times in your professional life. You don't have to badmouth anyone. You don't have to be bitter about it. But there is something that really comes from seeing people who you admire and people you think are successful, who have had difficult things happen to them, even if they didn't broadcast it from the rafters. And so I think this has been a really great case study on how to do that with real grace and in a way that is more helpful than it is hurtful to others. So thank you so much. I feel like I should pay you. That was some really good advice.
You're very welcome.
Very good consultant.
Thank you. So I like helping people. So yeah, that's you're very welcome. And I do hope it has helped someone. And for a good long while, I mean, as I say, 18 months I was looking for a job. So it was at least 18 months that I was miserable in my job and brought that home. And so it was really unpleasant. So for anyone in that situation, there is light at the end of that tunnel. There are things you can do. It will get better. There are people you can go and talk to. There are resources out there, and just keep at it. And eventually, like it did with me, it will click and you'll get out of there and it will be fine.
Everything will pass. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.